My daughter-in-law looked me straight in the eye and said, "You're just a burden in this house." I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just smiled, and kept stirring my tea like nothing had happened. What I did next would change everything they thought they knew about me. "I'm glad you're here. Stay with me until the end. And tell me where you're watching from." I never imagined that one ordinary morning, and one cruel sentence at dinner, would finally open my eyes to the truth about my own family. The sunlight that morning had been soft, filtering through the thin curtains in my kitchen. The kind of quiet, golden light that makes everything feel slower, gentler. I remember standing by the counter, counting out coins from a small ceramic jar I'd kept for years. Pennies, nickels, quarters, little pieces of a life spent saving, sacrificing, stretching every dollar further than it was meant to go. At 72, you learn to live simply. You learn not to ask for too much. And most of all, you learn when you're no longer the center of anyone's world. I slipped on my coat, the same beige one I'd worn every winter for nearly a decade, and walked the 3 blocks to the corner convenience store. It was something I did every Thursday morning. Routine, predictable, safe. "Morning, Mrs. Carter," the young cashier said, barely looking up from his phone. "Good morning, dear," I replied, placing my usual items on the counter. A loaf of bread, a carton of milk, and, almost as an afterthought, a lottery ticket. I don't know why I bought it that day. Maybe it was habit. Maybe it was boredom. Or maybe, some quiet part of me was hoping for something, anything, to change. I tucked the ticket into my purse without checking it and walked back home, where the silence was waiting for me like it always did. By the time evening came, the house felt different. Not because anything had changed, but because I had. Dinner was already on the table when my son and his wife came in. The smell of roasted chicken filled the room, warm and familiar, like all the dinners I had cooked for this family over the years. "Did you pay the electric bill this month?" my daughter-in-law asked, her voice sharp, cutting through the air before she'd even taken off her coat. I looked up slowly. "Yes, I did." She sighed, exaggerated, like I had already disappointed her somehow. "We can't keep covering for you forever," she continued. "This isn't a charity." My son said nothing. He just sat down and started eating. That silence hurt more than her words. Then she looked at me again. Really looked this time. And that's when she said it. "You're just a burden in this house." For a moment, everything went quiet. The clinking of forks, the hum of the refrigerator, even my own breathing seemed to disappear. I felt something shift inside me. Not break. Not shatter. Just settle. Because what they didn't know, what none of them could have imagined, was that just a few hours earlier, I had walked back into that same little store, and learned that the piece of paper sitting quietly in my purse was worth $500 million. I didn't tell them. Not that night, not the next morning, not even the day after that. I let the words sit where they had landed. Burden. It's a strange thing, how one word can echo louder than years of silence. The house felt colder after that dinner. Not physically. The thermostat hadn't changed. The same old heater hummed in the background, struggling like it always did. But something underneath it all had shifted. Or maybe, I had. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. I always did. Old habits don't leave you, even when the people you built them for no longer notice. The kitchen was quiet, too quiet. No voices, no footsteps upstairs, just the soft ticking of the wall clock and the faint light creeping in through the blinds. I made coffee. 1 cup, black. I used to make 3. I sat at the same spot at the table where I had sat for over 30 years. The wood had worn smooth beneath my hands. I traced the edge of it with my fingers, remembering mornings when my son used to rush in late for school, when he would kiss my cheek without thinking, when this house felt like it belonged to all of us. Now it felt like I was visiting. I reached into my purse and pulled out the ticket. It didn't look like much. Just a small slip of paper. Numbers printed in black ink. No different from the hundreds of others I had bought over the years and forgotten about by the next day. But this one was different. I had already checked it once. At the store, the young cashier had scanned it twice, his eyebrows pulling together like he thought the machine was broken. Then he looked at me. Really looked at me. and said, "Ma'am, you might want to sit down." I didn't sit. I didn't react at all. I just nodded, folded the ticket, and walked out like it was any other Thursday. Now, sitting alone at my kitchen table, I checked it again. The numbers didn't change. They were still there. Still real. $500 million. I set the ticket down carefully, like it might disappear if I held it too tightly. Upstairs, I heard movement, doors opening, footsteps, my daughter-in-law's voice, sharp, rushed, already irritated about something. Life going on, exactly the same as before. They had no idea. And that was the part that surprised me the most. Not the money. Not the number. But the silence. For the first time in years, I had something that was entirely mine. Not something I had given. Not something I had shared. Not something they could take, criticize, or dismiss. Mine. I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the bitterness settle on my tongue. Then I picked up the ticket again, and slipped it back into my purse. Carefully, quietly. Because some things you don't announce. You protect. And as I listened to their voices drifting down from upstairs, complaining, arguing, living their lives as if I were nothing more than background noise, I realized something with a clarity that felt almost peaceful. They thought I was powerless. They thought I had nowhere to go. They thought I needed them. I looked around the kitchen one more time. At the worn cabinets, the faded curtains, the table that had held an entire lifetime of meals, laughter, and lately, silence. Then I stood up. Slowly, steadily. And for the first time in a very long time, I started thinking about what my life would look like without them. It was later that afternoon when I went back. Not to celebrate. Not to tell anyone. Just to be sure. The same convenience store, the same flickering light above the door, the same quiet hum of refrigerators lining the back wall. Everything looked exactly as it had that morning, like the world hadn't shifted at all. But I had. The young cashier was there again. He recognized me immediately this time. His posture straightened, his phone disappeared from his hand, and there was something different in his eyes. Respect. Or maybe, disbelief. "Ma'am," he said softly, Did you get a chance to call the number on the back?" I shook my head. No, not yet. That wasn't entirely true. I had looked at it, memorized it, even, but I hadn't dialed. Not because I didn't believe it. Because once I did, everything would become real. He nodded quickly. "You should. They'll walk you through everything. It's a big deal." A big deal. I almost smiled at that. He had no idea. I stepped aside as another customer came in. A man in a construction jacket complaining about gas prices. Normal life. Ordinary worries. The kind of problems I had spent decades solving. Stretching. Surviving. I walked to the small counter by the window and pulled the ticket out again, smoothing it between my fingers. $500 million. I still didn't feel like someone who had that kind of money. I felt like the same woman who counted coins for groceries. The same woman who reused aluminum foil and turned off lights in empty rooms. The same woman who learned how to be invisible in her own home. Money doesn't change you that quickly. But it changes what's possible. And for the first time, I allowed myself to think beyond that house. Beyond the kitchen table. Beyond the careful way I spoke so I wouldn't cause tension. "What happens next?" I asked, more to myself than anyone else. The cashier glanced over. "You'll need to verify your identity. They usually recommend getting a lawyer. Maybe a financial advisor too. Don't tell anyone yet. Don't tell anyone." That part felt easy. I folded the ticket again and slipped it into my purse. "Thank you," I said. He hesitated. "Ma'am, if you don't mind me saying, be careful. People change when money's involved." I met his eyes then. And for a moment, I wondered if he understood more than he was saying. "They already have," I replied quietly. I left the store and stepped out into the late afternoon sun. The air was warmer now, the sky stretching wide and open above me. For years, my world had felt small, contained, measured by what others needed from me, or expected me to be. But standing there, with that quiet weight sitting in my purse, something shifted again. Not fear. Not excitement. Clarity. I didn't need to rush. I didn't need to prove anything. And I certainly didn't need to share this with people who had already decided what I was worth. As I walked home, I slowed my steps. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't hurrying back to anyone. And somewhere between the corner of Maple Street and my front door, a thought settled in my mind, steady and unshakable. This wasn't just about money. This was about choice. And for the first time in years, I finally had one. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. I didn't turn on the lamp. I didn't reach for the television. I just listened. The house had its own sounds. It always had. Pipes shifting behind the walls. Floorboards settling. The faint hum of appliances downstairs. Sounds I used to associate with comfort. Now, they felt like reminders. Reminders that I had spent decades building a life inside these walls, only to become a guest in it. Down the hallway, I could hear my son's voice. Low, tired, saying something I couldn't quite make out. Then my daughter-in-law's voice followed, sharper, faster, filling the space the way it always did. I closed my eyes. And for a moment, I wasn't 72 anymore. I was 35, standing in this same house when it was still new. Paint fresh on the walls. Furniture mismatched because we couldn't afford better. My husband laughing as he tried to fix a cabinet door that wouldn't stay straight. We didn't have much back then. But we had respect. We had a way of speaking to each other that didn't cut. A way of disagreeing that didn't leave scars. I remembered the nights I stayed up late, balancing checkbooks at the kitchen table. The mornings I woke before sunrise to pack lunches, iron shirts, make sure everything ran smoothly so my son would never feel what it was like to go without. I gave him stability. I gave him a home. I gave him a life where he never had to question whether he belonged. And somewhere along the way, I became the one who didn't. I turned onto my side, pulling the blanket closer around me. There had been signs. Of course there had. Small things. At first. My favorite chair slowly becoming his spot. My things being moved without asking. Conversations happening around me, instead of with me. Then the bigger things. Decisions made without my input. Plans discussed as if I weren't part of them. And eventually, the tone. That quiet shift in the way my daughter-in-law spoke to me. Polite on the surface, but always just a little too sharp. A little too dismissive, as if she were tolerating something, rather than welcoming it. I had told myself it was nothing. That families change. That younger people have different ways. That I should be grateful just to be included. I adjusted. I stayed quiet. I made myself smaller. And tonight, she called me a burden. The word echoed again, softer this time, but deeper. Not because it surprised me, but because it confirmed everything I had been trying not to see. I opened my eyes and stared into the darkness. $500 million. The number didn't feel real. But what it represented did. Choice. Freedom. Distance. I thought about the years ahead. More dinners like tonight. More silence from my son. More careful steps, measured words, trying not to take up too much space in a house that used to be mine. Or something else. I sat up slowly, my joints protesting the movement, and reached for my purse on the nightstand. I didn't turn on the light. I didn't need to. I knew exactly where the ticket was. My fingers found it easily. Folded, protected, waiting. I held it for a moment, just feeling the weight of it. Not the paper. The possibility. Then I placed it back inside and closed my purse gently. Because this wasn't about proving them wrong. It wasn't about showing them what I had. It was about understanding something I should have realized a long time ago. I didn't need their permission to live my life. And as I lay back down, listening to the distant sound of their voices fading into the night, I made a quiet decision. I would not spend the rest of my years being tolerated. The next morning, I didn't wait for them to leave. I didn't wait for the house to empty or for the noise to settle. I got dressed slowly, the same way I always did. Careful, quiet, predictable. But this time, there was something different underneath it. Not hesitation. Not uncertainty. Purpose. I walked into the kitchen just as my daughter-in-law was pouring herself coffee. She barely glanced at me. "Try not to use too much hot water today," she said casually. "The bill's already higher than it should be." I nodded. Of course. My son sat at the table, scrolling through his phone. He didn't look up, didn't say good morning. That used to bother me. Now, it just told me everything I needed to know. I poured myself a cup of coffee and stood there for a moment, letting the silence stretch. Then I set the cup down, untouched. "I have an appointment today," I said. My daughter-in-law sighed. "With who?" "A lawyer." That got her attention. Her head turned slightly, eyes narrowing just enough to notice. "For what?" she asked. I shrugged gently. "Just organizing some things." My son finally looked up. "What things?" he asked, his tone cautious now. I met his eyes for a brief moment. The same eyes that used to look at me with trust, with warmth, with something that felt like home. "Things that belong to me," I said. No anger. No explanation. Just the truth. They didn't like that answer. I could see it immediately. The way their expressions tightened. The way the room shifted ever so slightly. Like something invisible had just been placed on the table between us. "Mom, you don't need a lawyer," my son said. "If this is about bills or anything, we can handle it." I almost smiled at that. "I'm sure you can," I replied calmly, "but I prefer to handle my own affairs." My daughter-in-law crossed her arms. "You're being dramatic." I didn't respond. Because this wasn't drama. This was clarity. I picked up my purse from the chair, holding it a little closer than usual. Not out of fear. Out of awareness. Inside it was the one thing they would never expect. And the one thing I would not let them touch. "I'll be back later," I said. No one stopped me. No one asked where I was going exactly. But I could feel it as I walked toward the door. Their attention following me. Their curiosity growing. Because for the first time, I wasn't asking. I wasn't explaining. I wasn't shrinking to fit inside the version of me they had created. I opened the front door and stepped outside. The air felt different again. Cooler, sharper, real. The street looked the same. The same houses. The same sidewalks. The same quiet rhythm of a neighborhood that had watched my entire life unfold. But today, I wasn't just part of it. I was moving through it. On my own terms. The drive to the lawyer's office took about 20 minutes. I kept both hands steady on the wheel. My eyes focused straight ahead. No music. No distractions. Just the sound of my own breathing, and the quiet weight of what I was about to do. I parked, turned off the engine, and sat there for a moment. Not nervous. Not afraid. Just aware. Because once I walked through those doors, everything would begin to change. Not for them. For me. The office was quiet when I walked in. Soft carpet, neutral walls, the kind of place designed to make people feel safe. A young receptionist looked up and smiled politely. "Good morning. Do you have an appointment?" "Yes," I said. "Carter. Margaret Carter." She typed for a moment. Then nodded. "He'll be with you shortly." I sat down in one of the chairs near the window. My purse rested on my lap. My hand placed gently over it, not out of fear, but out of certainty. A few minutes later, a man in his 50s stepped out and called my name. "Mrs. Carter?" I stood, smoothing my coat. "That's me." His office was simple, organized, papers stacked neatly, no clutter. He gestured for me to sit, then took his place across from me. "What can I help you with today?" he asked. I didn't rush. I opened my purse slowly, and placed the lottery ticket on his desk. For a moment, he didn't react. Then his eyes shifted. Focused. Changed. "I see," he said quietly. That was all. No surprise. No dramatic reaction. Just understanding. "I haven't told anyone," I said. He nodded. "Good. That was the right decision." I folded my hands in my lap. "I want to keep it that way," I continued. "For now." "Of course," he said, "we can put protections in place immediately. Trusts, privacy measures, asset separation. Everything can be structured so that this remains entirely under your control." Under my control. The words settled in slowly. Not rushed. Not overwhelming. Just steady. I also want to make sure, I added, choosing each word carefully, that no one can access it without my permission. He leaned back slightly, studying me. Family concerns? He asked. I met his eyes. Yes. He didn't ask for details. He didn't need to. I'll start with a private trust, he said. Everything will be moved there. Quietly. Legally. No one will see anything unless you choose to show them. I nodded. That was exactly what I wanted. No announcements. No explanations. No opportunity for anyone to suddenly remember how much they cared about me. He slid a folder toward me. We'll need some signatures, he said. I picked up the pen. My hand didn't shake. Not once. Because this wasn't about money. This was about something much simpler. For the first time in years, I was protecting myself. And as I signed my name, slow, steady, deliberate, I realized something that felt almost unfamiliar. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was deciding. By the time I stepped out of the lawyer's office, the sun had shifted. Afternoon light stretched across the parking lot. Long and quiet, the world looked exactly the same. But I didn't. I sat in my car for a moment before starting the engine. My hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. Everything was in motion now. Not loudly. Not visibly. But legally, completely. The trust had been initiated. The process had begun. Within days, everything tied to that ticket would be moved, secured, and placed somewhere no one else could reach. Not my son. Not his wife. No one. I drove home slower than usual. Not because I was unsure. Because I was thinking. For years, I had tried to understand them. Their moods. Their expectations. The unspoken rules of a house that used to feel like mine. Now, I found myself observing instead. From a distance. As if I had already taken a step back they couldn't see. When I pulled into the driveway, both of their cars were there. Of course they were. I turned off the engine and sat for a second longer. Then I picked up my purse and walked inside. The atmosphere hit me immediately. Tense. Too quiet. They were waiting. My daughter-in-law stood near the kitchen counter. Arms crossed. My son sat at the table. But his phone was face down this time. They looked up the moment I walked in. "Where were you?" she asked. No greeting. No softness. Just control. I set my purse down gently on the chair. "I told you," I said. "I had an appointment." "With a lawyer," she pressed. "For what exactly?" I looked at her. Not defensive. Not apologetic. Just steady. For my own matters. That wasn't enough for her. It never would be. My son leaned forward slightly. "Mom, if something's wrong, you can talk to us." Us. That word again. I almost remembered what it used to mean. "There's nothing wrong," I said calmly. "I'm just making sure everything is in order." My daughter-in-law let out a short laugh. That sounds serious for someone who doesn't have much to organize. The words hung in the air. Sharp. Intentional. Familiar. But this time, they didn't land the same way. Because this time, she was wrong. And she didn't even know it. I picked up my purse again and walked past them. No argument. No explanation. Just movement. Because the truth was, I didn't need to convince them of anything anymore. I didn't need them to understand. And as I reached the stairs, I could feel their eyes on me again. Watching. Questioning. Trying to figure out what had changed. I paused for just a second. Not turning around. Not saying a word. Just standing there, long enough for the silence to settle. Then I continued upstairs. Because for the first time, I wasn't the one being watched. I was the one deciding what they were allowed to see. The next few days, I said very little. Not because I had nothing to say. But because I was listening. Watching. Learning things I should have seen years ago. It's strange how quiet a house can feel when you stop trying to fill it. I stayed in my routine. Morning coffee, light cleaning, small movements that made it seem like nothing had changed. But everything had. At night, I would sit in my room with the doors slightly open. Not enough to be obvious. Just enough to hear. Their voices carried more than they realized. "We can't keep doing this," my daughter-in-law said one evening, her tone sharp, impatient. "Then what do you want me to do?" my son replied. A pause. Then her voice again, lower this time, more calculated. "She needs to move out. Or somewhere, assisted. This isn't working." Assisted. I didn't move. I didn't react. I just sat there, letting the words settle the way burden had. A plan. That's what it was. Not frustration. Not stress. A plan. The next morning, I noticed small things. Papers on the kitchen counter that hadn't been there before. A brochure. A smiling elderly couple on the front, standing in front of a building that looked more like a hotel than a home. Independent senior living. I picked it up. Read it slowly. Then placed it back exactly where I found it. No comment. No question. Later that afternoon, my son approached me. "Mom," he started, "careful now. We've been thinking, maybe it would be better for you to have your own space. Somewhere more comfortable, with people your age." People your age. I looked at him. Really looked this time. At the way he avoided my eyes. At the way his words sounded practiced, like he had said them before. "Just not to me." "That's thoughtful," I said softly. And I meant it. Not because of what he was offering, but because of what he was revealing. My daughter-in-law stepped in quickly, filling the silence. "It's for your benefit," she added. "You'd have more support, activities, structure." Structure. I nodded slowly. "I'll think about it," I said. That seemed to satisfy them. For now. But as I turned away, I felt something settle deeper inside me. Not anger. Not sadness. Clarity. Because they thought they were preparing me for a transition. A quiet exit. A gentle way of removing me from their lives, without calling it what it really was. But what they didn't understand was that I was already preparing something of my own. Not an escape. A decision. And the difference between the two was control. It happened the following Sunday. They chose the timing carefully. Late morning, clean house, sunlight coming through the windows like everything was calm, normal, reasonable. My daughter-in-law had set the table, but not for a meal. Papers. Pens. A folder, thicker than the last one. My son stood near the counter, arms crossed, waiting. They didn't ask me to sit. They expected me to. So I did. Slowly, quietly, without a word. "We thought it would be easier to go over everything together," she said, sliding the papers toward me. I glanced down. Forms. Signatures needed. Authorization. Transfer of responsibility. It was all there. Neatly prepared. Legally structured. Just enough to look official. "We've already spoken to someone who can help manage things for you," she continued. "Finances, care, decisions. You won't have to worry about anything. Manage things for you." I almost smiled. My son finally spoke. "Mom, this is just to make sure everything is handled properly. It's for your protection." Protection. I looked at him. Really looked. At how easily the word came out of his mouth. At how comfortable he seemed saying it. And I realized. He believed it. Or maybe, he needed to. I picked up the first page. Read it. Then the second. Then the third. They watched me closely. Waiting. Expecting hesitation, confusion, maybe even fear. But none of that came. Because for the first time, I understood exactly what they were doing. And more importantly, I knew something they didn't. I set the papers down gently. Then I reached into my purse. Slow. Deliberate. I placed a different folder on the table. Not thick. Not complicated. Just precise. My daughter-in-law frowned slightly. "What's that?" "My paperwork," I said. My son leaned forward. "What paperwork?" I opened the folder and turned it toward them. Documents. Official. Stamped. Signed. The room changed instantly. You could feel it. Not loudly. But completely. "I've already taken care of my finances," I said calmly. "Everything has been placed into a private trust." They didn't speak. Didn't move. Just stared. "There's nothing here for you to manage," I continued. No accounts to access. No decisions to make. My daughter-in-law's expression tightened. That doesn't make sense, she said. You don't have anything significant to. I do, I said softly. And that was enough. Silence fell over the table. Heavy. Uncertain. Unfamiliar. My son looked at the documents again. Then at me. What is this? He asked. I closed the folder gently. It's my life, I said. Nothing more. Nothing less. And as I sat there, watching them struggle to understand something they had never thought to question before, I realized this wasn't the moment they lost control. It was the moment they realized they never had it. No one spoke for a long time. Not after I closed the folder. Not after the words settled. The room felt smaller somehow. Like the walls had shifted just enough to make everything tighter. Harder to breathe in. My son was the first to move. He leaned back slowly, running a hand through his hair. Confused, uneasy, trying to piece together something that didn't fit the version of me he had been holding on to. What do you mean, a trust? He asked. His voice wasn't firm anymore. It wasn't certain. It was searching. I folded my hands in my lap. It means, I said calmly, that everything I own is now protected. Legally, privately, and entirely under my control. My daughter-in-law let out a short, disbelieving laugh. That's ridiculous, she said. You don't just set something like that up overnight. I looked at her. Not cold. Not angry. Just steady. You're right, I said. You don't. That answer sat between us. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Because it wasn't just about what I had done. It was about how long I had been thinking, without them realizing. My son leaned forward again. This time slower. Mom, why didn't you tell us? He asked. There it was. Not concern. Not apology. Just confusion. I held his gaze for a moment. Then I looked away. Because there was nothing to discuss. I said. My daughter-in-law's voice cut in quickly. Nothing to discuss? We're your family. Family. The word sounded different now. Lighter. Almost hollow. I nodded once. Yes, I said, you are. And I let the silence do the rest. Because I didn't need to explain what had changed. They already felt it. The shift. The distance. The fact that something they had assumed was theirs to manage, was no longer within reach. My son stood up, pacing once across the kitchen. This doesn't make sense, he muttered. Why would you do this without telling us? We've been taking care of you. I almost smiled at that. Taking care of me. I thought about the bills I had quietly paid. The meals I had cooked. The way I had made myself smaller, so they could feel larger. That's exactly why, I said. He stopped. Turned toward me. But I didn't elaborate. I didn't need to. Because the truth wasn't something I had to argue. It was something they were beginning to see, piece by piece. My daughter-in-law crossed her arms again, her patience thinning. So what now? She asked. You just do whatever you want? I met her eyes. And for the first time, I didn't see authority there. I didn't see control. I saw uncertainty. Yes, I said simply. That was all. No raised voice. No long speech. Just one word. And it landed harder than anything else I could have said. Because it wasn't a reaction. It was a decision. I stood up from the table slowly, adjusting the sleeve of my coat. No one stopped me. No one knew how. Because for the first time, they weren't dealing with the version of me they understood. They were facing someone else entirely. Someone who didn't need their approval. Someone who didn't need to stay. And as I picked up my purse, feeling the quiet weight of everything I now held, not just money, but choice, I realized something with absolute clarity. This wasn't the end of the conversation. It was the end of their control. I didn't leave that day. Not immediately. I went upstairs, closed the door behind me, and sat on the edge of the bed for a while, just listening. No voices followed. No footsteps. Just silence. The kind of silence that comes when people don't know what to say anymore. That night, I packed slowly. Not everything. Just what mattered. A few clothes, my documents, old photographs I had kept tucked away in a drawer no one ever opened. Moments from a life that had once felt full, before it became something I had to fit inside quietly. I moved carefully. Not hiding. Not rushing. Just finishing something. In the morning, I made coffee. 1 cup. Like always. But this time, I didn't sit at the table. I stood by the window instead, watching the light come in the same way it had for years. Soft, familiar, unchanged. The house looked the same. But it didn't feel like mine anymore. And that was all right. I heard them downstairs eventually. Low voices, uncertain, slower than usual. They didn't come up. They didn't ask anything. For the first time, they were waiting on me. I picked up my purse. Took one last look around the room. Not with regret. Not with anger. Just with understanding. Then I walked downstairs. They were both there. Sitting. Quiet. Watching. I stopped near the door. My son opened his mouth like he wanted to say something. An explanation. An apology. Maybe even a question. But I didn't give him the moment. "I'll be staying somewhere else for a while," I said. My voice was calm. Steady. Final. My daughter-in-law shifted slightly. "Where?" she asked. I met her eyes. And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to answer. "Somewhere that feels like mine," I said. That was enough. I reached for the door. Opened it. And stepped outside. The air felt different again. Not sharper. Not colder. Just open. I didn't look back. Because there was nothing left behind that I needed to carry with me. Not the silence. Not the words. Not the version of myself that had stayed too long. As I walked down the path, one thought settled quietly into place. I had spent years giving everything to people who barely noticed. Now, I was giving something to myself. Space. Choice. Freedom. And for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't leaving anything behind. I was finally moving forward.